Welcome back to another episode of the CSK8 podcast. My name is Jared O'Leary. Each week of this podcast is either a solo episode where I unpack some scholarship in relation to computer science education, or an episode with a guest or multiple guests. In today's episode, I'm speaking with Kalia Braswell. In our conversation, we discuss the lack of representation in education, improving equity and inclusion in CS education, what Kalia has learned with InTech Camp for Girls, how Kalia iterates on her own abilities, the importance of self-care, our thoughts on the future of CS education, and so much more. We do mention some organizations and podcasts and resources that are relevant to this particular episode, and I include those in these show notes, which you can find at jaredoleary.com, where there are hundreds, if not thousands, of free computer science education resources, including a link to bootuppd.org, which is the nonprofit that I work for, where I develop 100% free coding curriculum. And with that being said, we will now begin the interview with Kalia.
Hello, I am Kalia Braswell, the founder and current executive director of InTech Camp for Girls, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to inform and inspire girls to innovate in the technology industry. I'm also a third-year PhD student at Temple University, where I am studying computer science education and essentially looking at the activities we do within InTech to understand how to get more Black and Latina girls into the computer science industry. I was born in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, but grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I talk about my Charlotte pride a lot because Charlotte shaped a lot of who I am. And it was where I fell in love with computer science. So excited to be here and talk about computer science education.
Can you tell me the story of how you got into computer science education?
Absolutely. So I would say that I fell into computer science education, and it was through my nonprofit InTech that kind of led me here. So informally was teaching Black girls how to code through one-day camps, summer camps, and different experiences like that, and realized that this was something being researched in the academy space. And I also taught the Google Computer Science Summer Institute at Johnson C. Smith University the summer of 2018, where I taught Python and data structures to incoming freshmen for 3 weeks. And so I always had these activities, if you will, happening in my life where I'm like in the classroom formally and informally. Also served as an adjunct professor at Johnson C. Smith University in Charlotte. And so it was just like all of these things happening, right? And realized like, hey, this is actually a research area. And I went to SIGSE, which is the Special Interest Group for Computer Science Education. I think that's the full acronym. I went there in the spring of 2019 just to learn. I knew this was like a really huge venue for researchers in the computer science education space. And I was reconsidering the PhD path for myself and just wanted to go and meet people and learn about what was happening in the computer science education space. And it was very fruitful, that conference for me. And I later enrolled into a PhD program looking at computer science education and later published at SIGSE, which was a goal of mine. So super proud of that. But it was a roundabout way, if you will. Like I was already doing the work, and just kind of the education part of computer science from a research area kind of came later. And it was a really, really good match for me.
And what are the research interests that you're pursuing for your PhD work?
So I'm using intersectionality as a framework to look at, specifically, I've narrowed it down to Black girls. InTech focuses on Black and Latina girls, but for my research, because being a Black girl is my lived experience, I decided that would be the best route for me. But looking at their different identities and how it impacts their experiences in computer science education spaces. And I say spaces to keep it broad because that could mean informal learning experiences like summer camps, but they could also mean more formal computer science education spaces like AP Computer Science or, whatever computer science classes that are offered to them. But understanding, what impacts their intent to persist. Like, do they come to an InTech camp and say, hey, now I want to be a computer scientist? Do they take an AP Computer Science class and fall in love with it? What are the different things that have to be true for a Black girl to feel these spaces are safe for them to then go on and study computer science in college? And I always say like intent to persist in computer science, period, right? But it's like, what does that mean? So that could either mean go and major in computer science, or it could mean being in the tech industry in some capacity. It doesn't have to mean that they go to college.
Yeah, even in leisure, like I proposed to my wife by modding a video game. And so like that is something that you could do
Really?
Yeah, I'm that kind of nerd.
I love it.
What has surprised you about your experiences in CS education research? Like, what is being talked about or not being talked about, or things that you've learned?
So before I answer that question, I want to give a little context. So when I came to Temple, I was in the computer science PhD program, and we were essentially trying to make up a computer science education program for me. So it doesn't exist, but we were trying to make it up. So I was in the computer science PhD, but I was also taking education courses unofficially, right? And so I realized after my first year that the computer science PhD program was not a good fit for me. It was very stressful, and I could go on, but I decided the education program at Temple was a better fit. And the powers that be let me switch over, which is not something you do in a PhD program traditionally. Like, it's not like changing your major,
Right.
but they let me do it. So I give that context because I mean, my mind has been blown, right, over and over again in my education courses, because now I'm like unlearning so much about the education system in general and like how it works, and then applying my computer science lens on it. And so, it's interesting in my courses because, everybody think I'm brilliant because I'm like, oh, I study computer science. They're like, what? And I'm like, no, 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 no. Like, I don't know all the things, I promise. So I say all that to say that, like, again, I grew up in a public school system, and learning the laws that have been in place, like the policies that have been put in place, and like the different structures, if you will, that have been put in place, how this stuff works. So, like, again, I grew up in Charlotte. I grew up on the west side of Charlotte, predominantly Black area. And I had administrators that were Black, like principals. I had teachers that were Black. My AP computer science teacher was a Black woman. I went to a technical high school in Charlotte, and a lot of my teachers in the tech program were Black women, right? So I get into this PhD program, and mind you, like, I finished my undergrad in 2013. So fast forward now to 2019, 2020, whatever. I'm now like realizing, like, hey, this isn't normal. My peers who are Black students who went through public education K through 12 like I did, they didn't have these experiences. They may can count on one hand the amount of Black people that existed in their school, period, that wasn't like,
Yep.
A custodian, like to have an administrator, like one of the things that kind of led me here was it was a tweet, like someone tweeted and were like, how many Black teachers did you have growing up or something like that? And I'm like, so you all didn't have any, like it was like mind blowing. So then I look at the data in the classes that I'm in, and I'm like, wow, and I say all that because at Intech, as much as possible in our camp experiences, we try to make sure that majority of our staff are Black women. They're not exclusively Black women. We have folks from all walks of life that sign up to teach or run our programs, but we try to make sure that majority of the folks that are running the camp and doing the teaching and things of that sort, the speakers are exclusively Black women. And we do that on purpose, right? Because we want to make sure they have that representation. But that still blew my mind, that there aren't a lot of Black educators in the K through 12 space in general. And then you narrow that down to computer science and it gets worse, right? So that's something that I've been like, or just mind blown by, rather, in the education space at large.
Yeah, it wasn't until my undergrad when I actually had a Black educator in my life. In my K-12 tenure, there was only one Black teacher at the high school that I went to, but he taught a class that I ended up not taking.
Wow.
Like, it was just not part of what I was doing. Like, it was some kind of other math class. And this is in Arizona. So, like, nationwide stats, like, especially in the elementary space, it's like 80% are white women. And then
I had no idea. I had no idea.
Yeah, it was like hearing what you were talking about. It was just like, yep, that resonates. Like, it wasn't until literally my undergrad, and I had a percussion professor who I happened to work with for like all 4 years, that I finally had a Black mentor, Black teacher in my life. Yeah, this was Arizona and like a major high school and university.
Wow. Well, I think it's still cool that you had one at the university level, because I didn't even talk about that, right? Like, that's a whole nother discussion. And I don't think I had any Black professors in undergrad. I'm saying it slowly because I'm trying to think. I know my best friend did. So I went to NC State to do computer science. I went in computer engineering. So I have this habit, I guess, of coming in and doing one thing and being like, nope, that's not it. So I did computer engineering when I first got to NC State as a freshman, but switched over. In that time, though, my best friend did have a Black woman teach him for computer science, but I missed it because I didn't go in as computer science. And it just kind of like makes me think, about my time at Johnson C. Smith as an adjunct. Johnson C. Smith is a HBCU, historically Black college. And I would go to class. I was teaching intro to networking. And, my students were like, "You're the professor?" And I was like, "Yeah." And, it was just really puzzling to them. And I said, "Well, do you all not have professors that look like me?" And they were like, "No." And coming from a predominantly white institution, I was surprised that that was their reaction and their answer. And I was going through some old stuff yesterday and realized that I had posted on Instagram where my students clapped for me at the end of the semester. And I didn't think I did a great job, by the way. So, but I think it was more so that when I first started, I came in dressed like a professor, right? Or how we think a professor dresses.
Right.
By the middle, I'm like, all right, I'm in the jeans and Jordans. So I think that, they could relate to me a little better, but I don't think I really understood the impact I was having on them in that experience, even at a Black school, right? So I think largely from an education perspective, these are the things that are just blowing my mind when I'm learning how at large, these are how things are, even though my lived experience is different.
Yeah, I mean, while I was fortunate to have studied with the particular percussion professor for a few years, their only other person of color was a grad student who taught an undergrad class, and he was from the Navajo Nation. And other than that, it was all white individuals, and all the way through until my dissertation defense, I had a reader who happened to be a Black professor. Other than that, it was all white individuals. So and again, major university. So it is.
That's crazy.
Pretty stark difference between what the demographics of the nation look like and even in the community versus where I went to. And Arizona, there are a lot of Hispanic and Latinx individuals here, but I did not have any professors who were Hispanic or Latinx.
And it's so crazy. It informs my work a ton because I just realized how privileged I was to have that as an experience, By the time I got to college, where obviously the number of Black students and Black women taking computer science courses drop off, and then we just had that professor discussion. By that time, there was no convincing me. I already knew that I could do it because I had seen it so much, in those prior 4 years in high school. Literally, because we had an academy model, a NAF academy model at my high school. So there was an IT academy, engineering, and health. IT academy lead was a Black woman. I remember majority of the teachers were Black women in that academy. And again, my AP computer science. So it's just phenomenal that was my experience. Even the IT admin for the entire school was a Black woman. And I remember wanting to be like her, because she's like Olivia Pope, but for tech, right? It's oh, the computers are down. Let's call Miss Suggs. And she would come save the day. And I was like, I want to be like her. Now I don't want to be like her. But high school Kalia definitely wanted to be like Miss Suggs.
So what recommendations do you have for how we could potentially improve equity and inclusion in CS education?
That is a loaded question.
Yeah.
That's a good question though. So the reason why I kind of hesitate is only because, and the reason why I say it's a loaded question is because, you have to figure out at what level first, because I think the recommendations vary per level. You can't even really say K through 12, right? You have to break that down, even elementary, middle, high school, and then college, and then, at the master's PhD level. I think some of the smaller things could be, one, making sure everyone has access. That's the equity piece. So there are schools that are one-to-one. So every student gets a laptop, that kind of thing. But does every student also get Wi-Fi at home? If I have a Chromebook, that's nice. But if I can't do my work when I go home, there's a dead end there, which obviously COVID, I think, has forced districts to have to solve that problem, which is good. And forced industry to tap in and, make sure students have what they need. But I think that's the first step, because our first computer was when I was in the 4th grade and we had internet. And that's what sparked my curiosity with computer science and tech, and just kind of getting, I was just learning just by trial and error at that time. And so the access is key first. I try to think of the lower hanging fruit. And so in addition to the access, I would think the representation part, which I think folks are kind of getting better at. I mean, if you have, and I used to work at Apple, but photos and posters of Steve Jobs and, Mark Zuckerberg, and that's all the students are seeing, then at that point, they're not able to kind of imagine themselves. And I think, movies like Hidden Figures touched on that and kind of shifted that for a lot of folks. But it really could sometimes be that simple. Like if there's not a physical person that looks like me in this school building doing the tech, right? But I can see them on the poster and learn about, Mae Jemison or Katherine Johnson or, all these pioneers. And they don't have to be Black women, but women in general. Either way, I feel like that's a small thing, like just kind of like the classroom setup. At Intech, we used to do, before the pandemic, we would reach out to teachers and reach out to the women in our network, pair them together and send them as guest speakers into classrooms for a 1 hour experience. And in the presentation, at the beginning, like as we're going through, well, what is information technology? What is computer science? What is computer engineering? That would be a Black woman on the slide also that, works in that industry. And then the second half of the presentation, the person that's in the class giving the presentation would give their journey, right? And so now you've met, quote unquote, 4 or 5 different folks that are in computer science that are Black women that you didn't know before. And that was a small way of us kind of just getting the exposure out there. And I think it's impactful. I'm doing a little bit of research now on like representation and its impact on informal and like more formal mentorship for Black girls. Yeah, those are some of the things off the top of my head on like the equity and inclusion space. Just being intentional, right? I think sometimes people try to over complicate these solutions, and it's really like, no, it doesn't have to be that intense, Following different Instagram accounts that promote diversity in CS is a good start, right? Because then you can pull that stuff into your classroom. Like there's multiple ways. But those are the things that come off right away.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's one of the questions that I ask of like every guest because it's shocking that the Kapor Center released a publication on basically the state of CS education across the nation, like in teachers. And it was like 40% of teachers didn't think we needed to talk about social justice issues or equity and inclusion in a CS classroom. So it's like, okay, we need to continue to have these conversations because some people don't believe we need to talk about it. And I disagree.
It's unfortunate.
So you've mentioned Intech a couple times. Can you expand upon what is Intech Camp for Girls?
Intech Camp for Girls is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to inform and inspire girls to innovate in the technology industry. And so the way that we do that is by a few different experiences. COVID has kind of shifted some of these, but we host a summer camp for middle school girls where they build websites about social issues of their choice. So we put them in groups, they code and they learn HTML, CSS in the morning time. By the end of the week, they have a finished product. Before COVID, we would go on company tours. And so they would actually go out and, visit companies and hear from their employees. We would work closely with the different employee resource groups to try to get either the women's group to sponsor or, there's rarely like a Black women's ERG, or the Black related, employee resource group at the company to host either like a panel and or a hands-on activity with our students. With COVID, we switched to a virtual model. And so we still host our summer camps. Obviously, we can't do the company tours. So we just bring in Black and Latina women in tech to speak to our students and kind of do like a Q&A during their lunchtime. We also host Intech Academy, which is our high school program, which was born out of our middle school girls aging out of our summer camp. Like they would come 6th, 7th, 8th grade, and then they say, "Hey, Miss Kalia, so if I want to come to Intech next year, how's that going to work?" And so we got to the point where we had enough high school students to sponsor that. The Intech Academy is ever evolving, but the goal for it is literally to be a training ground for girls to go deeper into web development. So HTML, CSS, JavaScript, but actually learn the ins and outs. And the vision for Intech Academy is for them to then get internships, because that is something I was able to take advantage of as a high school student. And I don't see programs like that much anymore, particularly in Charlotte, North Carolina. But since we're virtual, we do this everywhere. But the goal is for them to meet peers, but also get mentorship from women in the technology industry through our Intech Academy. And I mentioned before, we used to do mini camps. So during Computer Science Education Week or Engineers Week, we would do a huge push where we would get like 20 to 30 women in tech in Raleigh and Charlotte, North Carolina, to go out into classrooms and do these presentations and these computer science unplugged activities with students because it was only an hour, just to kind of rally them up and get them exposed. And so it's been quite the journey. We've been around for about 7 years, and we're just now getting to that point where students who've come to us either in middle or high school are now in college. So we have a rock star student that I like to talk about, Maria, who got a full ride to Princeton for engineering, which is like amazing. She was also valedictorian. I could go on, but we have quite a few students at North Carolina A&T State University, as well as Spelman University. And so the student at Spelman that I mentioned, she actually wasn't an InTech student formally, right? She actually worked at one of our camps between her senior year and freshman year of college. After working at InTech, she changed her major to computer science. I was under the impression that she was already in tech, but that's another discussion. And so she's, gone to intern at top companies. And I think this is her senior year now, and she's going to look into software engineering. And so it's one of those communities where it's like, even if you've taught with us, volunteered with us, or was a student in one of our programs, we try to keep in touch and really look out for folks either way. I've done recommendation letters for people who've worked at our camps and things of that sort. And so it makes the community special in that way.
What's something that has surprised you about your experiences with InTech?
Something that surprised me is that we created something that the students actually like. In summer camps, especially, a lot of times parents sign their students up and you just kind of have to go.
Right.
And so we've had students that were like that just kind of came because their mom signed them up. But by the end of the experience, they were like, I loved it, And my professional background is actually in user experience design and research. And so I'm always interested in, okay, well, what do the students want to get out of this? Because we can whiteboard and plan and do what we think should happen. But at the end of the day, we have to create an experience that the girls are going to want to come to. And that has surprised me. Like I told you, we literally will have students that would come every year from middle school. And they literally like, okay, Miss Kalia, I'm in high school next year. How can I be involved with InTech? And I was like, oh, okay, let me figure that out. I don't know right now, but I'll get an answer for you. So
yeah, that really resonates with me, the idea of starting with what students want to actually get out of a class or an educational experience. That's one of the things when I talked about Paulo Freire's book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, is like the way that classes, curriculum, or even standards are structured can be a form of like epistemological colonization or even ontological colonization, where it's, hey, you are lesser than, we are the knowers, and we are going to tell you this is what you need to understand and how you need to behave and what you need to do in a class. And it creates this, like you mentioned, these like systems or these structures of oppression, hopefully unintentionally, but either way, it still exists. And it's one of the things that we need to talk about more as a field to figure out, well, what can we do to try and prevent this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it reverberates down, right? Like from the policies all the way down to the teacher being in control, if you will, of the classroom. Yeah, I 100% agree with you.
Where do you hope InTech will go in the future, and what are your plans?
In August, announced my resignation, if you will. So we're actually in a search for a new executive director, which I can come back to in a second, because I want to answer your first question. I hope that InTech truly becomes one that bona fide safe space for Black and Latina girls to come to, and they know that hey, if I want to learn, something tech related, I can come to InTech and do it, and there's resources for me. But my, again, grand vision is for our high school girls to get paid internships. There's a lot of red tape in doing that when you get to corporate companies and things of that sort. Sometimes it's a little easier with I hosted a high school intern. My friend runs the nonprofit America on Tech. So they're based in LA and in Brooklyn, and they had a huge internship program this summer, and we hosted an intern. I think the city of New York actually paid for her stipend. Those kind of things are cool, but I know they take a lot of work because we've tried to partner with our corporate sponsors to get, more senior girls into some kind of experience, even if it's 4 or 5 weeks or something like that. It's just hard, right? It's a hard problem to solve, but I think it's necessary because they can automatically learn what they like and what they don't like. It sets them apart from their peers because now they actually have figures on their resume about okay, for me, I came out of high school saying, yeah, I worked on a network engineering team at what once was Wachovia, now it's Wells Fargo. My peers didn't have that kind of experience.
Right.
that wasn't my dream first job. I wanted to work at a grocery store. And then there's an economical impact, right? Like
Yeah.
as a senior in high school, having that internship experience before my senior year and then later during my senior year, I was able to like pay for prom costs. I was able to pay for like college costs. I think all of my fees were waived for applying, but there's other stuff that comes with college. Just being a senior, right? That was a relief for my parents. So I always think from tech, like the economical impact, I just really hope that we can solve that for our high school students through Intech. I am in the final stages of my PhD. That's always hard to say, right? Like, when is it over? I don't know.
Yeah, I get that.
I know you can relate. I'm in a weird spot, especially since I transferred into a different program. So while my qualifying exams are finished, I'm still in coursework. So I can't propose and I can't defend. It's just a very, very weird space. But I hope to graduate, which I will, continue to publish research in this space. But I think right now I want to go back into the tech workforce and do either, if I'm at a larger company, user experience research. If I'm at a smaller company, user experience research and design. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Codio, but I interned with them this summer. It was kind of a hybrid role. Like the intent of the role was to kind of get my feet wet in learning sciences and like learning analytic, but because they didn't have a designer in their company or, someone with like design expertise, I kind of took on some of those roles, which was exciting. And then I also did a little bit of research. So if I'm at a smaller company, I would love to kind of continue having something hybrid like that. But if it's a larger company, I'll probably just focus on the research part.
It sounds like you have a lot of expertise or skills in different areas. I'm wondering, like, I'm a bit of a practice nerd. I really enjoy the art of like self-improvement, whether it's be like playing the instruments behind me or like as an educator, like how do I like really refine this pedagogical approach, etc. How do you like practice or iterate on your own abilities?
I think I could do better at practice. I'm a like gamification person. So every year, like for instance, I set a reading goal, 20 books. And so I try to make sure, each quarter I'm at least finishing 5 books, things of that sort. And that reinforces my practice. And I'm glad that I started that goal before grad school because now reading these really long research articles are easy, but writing is hard.
Yep.
So I haven't really cracked the writing practice, but I have this Black women writing group that I'm in, and we meet for 2 hours on Mondays and Wednesdays. And so if I don't write any more during the week, I try to show up to that and write something. And so like I need those kind of accountability and reinforcements. I'm a Peloton nerd and I even use that. Like they have challenges and badges and different things. And I'm like, okay, like for instance, I'm trying to reach 50 miles on my Peloton this month. So, all right, like I need to make sure I'm working out so I can meet that goal. So for me, practice has to be, I have to have like some kind of accountability and or like the gamification stuff. I mean, I don't know if you had accelerated reader, but I remember I read a certain amount in like elementary school. I got a free pizza at Pizza Hut. So I was like, well, how can I do this as an adult? So when I was in Charlotte, there was a friend I know owns a place called Pop Bar, and they make these like gelato on a stick creations, but they're like amazing. And so when I reached 5 books, I would go get Pop Bar. I haven't figured that out for Philadelphia yet. Those are the ways that I practice.
Yeah, I like that. One of the things that I do whenever like crafting questions for guests is like just look at all their different social media presence and accounts and whatnot. And one of the books that I saw you were reading was The Body Keeps Score. And so I actually started listening to that. I heard another podcast at that time, like that same day, that was like, yeah, I listened to this book and it was a great book. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to check it out. And it finally just arrived.
I actually haven't started it yet. It's on my list.
Oh, really? Okay.
Because the same with you, like I keep seeing it in places.
Right.
And I am in therapy and I'm a huge advocate for therapy, although I wasn't once before. Even just not even reading it, right? Just from the title, like I can feel that my body literally is keeping score.
Yep.
Whether it's stress or anxiety. Like the month of August was very stressful for me and it had physical impacts and like I could feel it. And I'm like,
right.
If I want to change this, then I have to like, implement my self-care stuff, right? So that my body is like, okay, but even through therapy, I'm learning that like trauma, which I think that book really hits on.
Yep.
We carry it in our body.
Yep.
And like that's fascinating just even thinking about it. I think both my therapist and an old nutritionist I had like told me like you carry trauma in your body. And I'm like, huh. Even like after the event, and they're like, yeah. And I'm like, wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, I'm also a big fan of therapy. My wife is a therapist. I'm seeing my therapist tomorrow. Like, it's something that I recommend for everyone. Even if you're going through good times, like, it helps prepare you for the times where it's not so great. And yeah.
Because sometimes those sessions where you're like, oh, everything's great are like the best, worst sessions, right? Because it's like you go in there, you're optimistic, and it's like, oh, so I had this other thing I needed to work on. Huh. All right. Didn't even think about that. Thanks, therapist. You're great.
Yep. So you were mentioning like the kind of unsure when the PhD will finish. Like I totally get that. There's a ton of burnout and stress that comes with going through a PhD program, and especially going through a PhD program and having all of the other interests that you're doing. Like, I imagine you were still doing Intech while you're doing the first couple of years. Like, how do you try and prevent that burnout?
To my own detriment. It's funny because there was another nonprofit founder in Charlotte that went to law school the same year I came to get my PhD, and he stepped completely away at that time, which was a fantastic idea. In hindsight, I wish I would have. But one thing that I've been telling folks is that like in tech, it's really the little engine that could. And if I would have stepped away in the way that I am now, financially, we wouldn't have been able to afford a new leader. And so like while it has been tough to run the organization and try to be a full-time student, like it gets really crazy sometimes, we're in a better position now to transition me out and get someone in from a financial perspective. But to answer your question around burnout, honestly, the fact that PhD school, the fact that grad school there's a lot of flexibility in it has worked in my favor. But each semester I have to figure out like what works for me. It literally changes each semester. So semesters where I have 2 courses and then I'm doing research, those are much lighter and I feel like I can breathe. But then the semesters where I have 3 courses, that's when it gets really crazy. I really had to start saying no to stuff. Like I was already saying no, but I had to like double down on no.
Yeah.
The pandemic helped and hurt me, I think. Like I feel like I missed out on those experiences where you can go to conferences and meet new people, learn new things, because I don't know about you, but I got conference burnout really quickly. So it's like I don't even want to go to the conference if it's virtual anymore. Again, I mentioned Sigsy, right? And how before PhD, I was able to meet so many people and learn. Like I literally used to leave conferences like with all of these ideas. Well, now I'm siloed because I'm at home, hit or miss with going to the virtual conferences. So that was a miss. But on the plus side, like my classes at Temple, for whatever reason, are from 5:30 until 8 p.m. every single class. There's no option for a daytime class in either of my programs. I think Temple designed it that way for folks who work.
Yep.
And so imagine trying to like be a responsible human and wake up at 7 or 8 a.m., get your day started. But then at 5:30, when you're ready to like wind down, you actually have to be on Zoom and be alert, or be in class and be alert until 8 p.m. So when I first got to Temple, I literally I'm not a morning person, but at that time, in that season of my life, I was a morning person. I would get up and I would go work out. So I was on campus by 9. And I had worked out, showered, eaten breakfast by 9. And then by 8, I'm like, oh man, this is tough. So then by Friday, I'm like, oh man, I have no energy to give to anybody. And so it's been trial and error for me. And I was like this before, but I don't have email apps on my phone anymore. That's actually new for me. But I previously didn't have notifications. So that helps with the burnout because I'm not constantly like worried about emails. I don't check my email until after I've had breakfast and my tea for the day and maybe even worked out. So I might not get to my email until 10 or 11 a.m. That has been helpful because I realized when I was checking email, it would kind of ruin my morning if I'm like trying to respond to something that I wasn't anticipating and I'm not in the headspace. Therapy has been helpful because my therapist kind of calls me out whenever I slack away from these practices. Try to make sure I work out. So it costs a lot of money, but I bought a Peloton bike. I proved to myself that I would use it first, though. I got a cheaper bike. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to take the plunge. I got to get the bike. And so I, try to like reach out to folks and say, hey, can you do this ride? Like I wrote before our conversation today. I was like, okay, I have to get this in now or it's not going to happen. And it's an unlearning experience, but I've tried to get much better at resting and truly resting. And I don't know when it was. It might have been last year where I realized sleep and resting are two separate things. I think people miss that because I was like, man, I need to get some rest. And they're like, oh, you're not sleeping well. And I was like, that's not what I said. I was like, no, I sleep great. Resting means that I am not thinking about anything. Like, like I'm like laying on the couch watching TV, like just kind of being aimless with my body and my brain, literally to rest. And I think a lot of people like me who are overachievers feel guilty when you're resting. It's like, oh, I should be doing something. I have let that go.
That's nice.
It's hard though, because of the systems that exist around us, like capitalism being one. You feel like you should be producing and putting out output. But I even think that mentality helped me step away from Intech because I started this organization. Ego would keep me here, but like I've worn a lot of hats and I've burned out, and I know what that feels like, and I don't like it. And so I'm in a place in my life where I'm like, even working with my therapist, actually, what does 80% Kalia look like? Because I give 150 to everything just by default, and it's killing me. So like, what does 80% look like? What does it look like if I do one thing? So at the top of the year, I'll just be a PhD student, and I'm excited about it. So
Yeah, there's so much good advice in there. I like your idea of like kind of viewing like the semester almost as like a season, like, oh, well, this is a lighter season or a heavier season in terms of like load and whatnot, but also just keeping the apps off the phone. Like I don't get notifications, and like that makes it easier. I try and avoid email until like 10 or 11 o'clock, and like then I'll check it one more time at the end of the day, like before I'm done, before I start to rest for the day. And
yeah, because you literally can feel your anxiety
oh yeah,
like going up when you're like checking the stuff
yep.
in a time where you shouldn't be. I don't even sleep with my phone in my bedroom anymore. I charge it in the kitchen or on my desk. And when I'm ready for bed, I walk away from it and I'll figure it out in the morning. And my family hates that though. Like, what if something happens? I'm like, well, call the police. Don't call me.
Yeah, and your comments about rest, like I engage in a process called Pomodoro. So like the way I do it is like 50 minutes of work and then a 10-minute break. So like an hour chunks. But what I realized, because I'm also very much like I need to be working and progressing or evolving and whatever, like those 10-minute breaks were like, oh, I'm going to practice drums for 10 minutes, or oh, I'm going to work on this thing and improve this thing for 10 minutes, but it's not work. And then I realized, no, I need to just take those 10 minutes and just do some yoga, like, and do that throughout the day and just shut my brain down, because it's better for me to rest. What do you wish there was more research on that could inform your own practices?
I wish there were more research on Black girls, period. So for my qualifying exam, I had to write a proposal. 30-page proposal was part of our process. And I wrote it as if it was like my dissertation proposal, because I'm tired of writing proposals, frankly, in this program. And before I even got started with the process, I had to send my committee an abstract of what I wanted to write about for them to approve it for me to go ahead and write the proposal. And I actually switched it all the way up because I started thinking, and I'm like, you know what? Because I had like proposed an intervention for our Intech Academy. Like I basically was gonna, administer some surveys and talk with some of our students about their experience. But I decided to zoom out and look at Intech as a whole. And because we've collected data like from the start, select interview participants based off some of their responses and their experiences in our programs. That's what I ended up proposing. But I like went deep in just what is the research on Black girls in education, right? Like it's an emerging field from a lens of it being positive and not negative, right? Because there's a lot of research about Black girls being pushed out of education, Black girls being suspended, being disruptive. And I'm like, where are the positive research studies at? It's coming. I actually found a field called Black Girlhood Studies that I had no idea about. And so that process for me was exciting and sad at the same time, because it was like, oh, like there are scholars starting to publish in this area. And I understand how publications work. So it's like work may have been done, it may not be published yet. I was able to find some things, but I'm like, okay, because that's just broadly thinking about Black girls in education. But then when you narrow it down to STEM, narrow it down to computer science, you start finding the same articles over and over. And so it's a catch-22, right? Because that means like, oh, well, more work needs to be done in this field. Cool, I can help contribute to that. But I wish there was more groundwork. Like what I found is that there is research around Black girls in science and math, but the technology and engineering part has a long way to go to catch up in that. So
Yeah, one of my favorite things to do on this podcast is to unpack papers from outside of the field because I feel like the field could benefit from exploring different lenses. Like there was an ICER paper that came out this year that actually used like a Bordesian lens to look at power structures and whatnot in CS education. And it's like, this is the first time I've seen anyone mention Bourdieu like in anything related to CS education. And it's fascinating. Like there's all these other fields and disciplines in education that talk about these interesting things that are very relevant, but it's not being discussed in relation to CS education.
yeah. And that honestly, like some of you asked a question around like, just my experience and like things that have been happening for me studying this stuff. I struggle in these theory classes because I'm like, what are you all talking about? But then I realized like, hey, this actually is important for my research. I think the disconnect is that I've been reading so much CS Ed articles, and I feel like in our space, it's not required for you to use a theory to drive, your research. It's just like, all right, we did this intervention and here are our results. And so part of the struggle is that I've never heard of some of these founding folks of these theories before. I'm not used to thinking in this way. And so when I stopped resisting it, I realized like, hey, this actually can help make my research stand out if I'm like, hey, this is my theoretical framework
Right.
that's guiding my inquiry. Actually, my first semester at Temple, when I was not in education, I took I think it was called Philosophical Foundations of Education. I hated that class. I hated it. I'm like, I don't know what you all are talking about. I don't even need this class. Like, I was just mad. But then I would get to class and my peers would be like, yeah, I struggled reading that article too. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool, cool, cool. We all struggled. Yeah, it's interesting. It's very interesting.
Yeah, and a lot of those authors like Foucault and Bourdieu, like when you read their stuff, it's like, okay, I need to read that again and again and again. And then I need to read like their 5 other books to make sense of this one sentence, like to contextualize it.
Can I find a YouTube video where someone breaks this down? Like,
right. Where's the cliff notes of this?
please help me. Oh my God. Jerome Bruner is the one that I just was like, I don't even know what's happening here.
Do you have any questions for myself or for the field?
Yes, I have a question. I kind of want to know your thoughts on where computer science education is going. Like, I feel like there have been trends, and one of the things that frustrates me sometimes is like the difference between digital literacy, computational thinking, computer science. Like, like folks throw these terms out and they mean different things to different people. Is what I'm learning. Kind of want to get your take on where you see the field going.
Yeah, the different terminology thing is fascinating. I went to like I forget what it's called, but it was like a summit talking about computational thinking. There's a bunch of like teachers and scholars all interested in computational thinking, and there's no like unified definition. Like everyone had their own like, no, you need to include this. No, you don't. You need to include this other thing. CS as a whole, I think, is often conflated with technology in general. Like, oh yeah, we learn like Microsoft Office. Okay, well that is not really CS unless you're, changing the code maybe, etc. But then CT also conflates things because CT is often presented as a thinking framework decontextualized from application in relation to computer science or even like simulations or anything computational. It's just a thing of, oh, well, I engaged in decomposition or debugging or something. Okay, great, but is that necessarily the greatest way of problem solving, like in your domain? I don't know, maybe or maybe not. So I hope as a field we kind of come together and recenter around, well, what does CS for all actually mean? And when we say all, why? Like if it's just for jobs, well, not everyone's going to get a job in CS. It's very important for those who do, but if it really is going to be a requirement for everyone, and hopefully we actually mean everyone, including like kids with disabilities and things like that, well, then we need to focus on other ways of exploring and using your understandings of computer science in a way that's relevant to you and your future life. Like if I have no interest in going into CS, how can I use this class I'm required to take and apply it into what I actually am interested in doing for a career?
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes, I agree. Because even at Intech, I realized I know I have all the degrees at this point and they're all technical, whatever, but I know that's not the reality for a lot of our students, and that's okay.
Right.
Because even when we're in person, like we would host our camps at NC State or at UNC Charlotte. So they're on a college campus and, they're meeting folks that have these majors and things of that sort. But it's like what I know to be true in tech is that the degrees, I mean, it's debatable, but you could get a certificate. Like there's just so many entryways into tech. I thought my PhD studies would go the teacher route because I feel like if I help teachers, they're going to reach more students than I ever will. And that might come back around. I just chose to use Intech as my dissertation work, but I'm like, what does professional development look like for teachers teaching computer science that don't have this background? Like that was my guiding question when I first got here. I had to put it on the wayside, but I'm just like, I remember when I taught the Google Computer Science Summer Institute course, teaching Python, data structures, and I hadn't looked at that stuff in a long time. And I had an all-star student in my class who would ask the deeper level questions. And I always had to say, like, let me come back to you. I feel like in education, you can have like a rock star teacher that has the pedagogy stuff knocked out and like knows how to interact with students and can work a classroom. And you have like the subject matter experts, right? And it's like, oh, how do you marry the two? I never had formal teaching training, right? I've picked up things along the way, but in some cases, I am the subject matter expert. And so it's like, well, okay, I can get by in teaching this course, but what if it was the other way around and I was hired because I'm a rock star teacher, but I don't necessarily know the content, right? And I have this all-star student in my class asking me like deeper questions. I know an expert teacher wouldn't know what to do with that, but it's just like, how do we get them the training that they need so that boom, they can answer the question, work with the student and, move forward. So that's something that I'm still kind of like curious about, but we'll see how that manifests itself.
Are there any questions or topics that we haven't discussed that you want to chat about?
So the topic around like teacher training is still fascinating to me. I know like the premise of this podcast is professional development, but I really wonder, even, thinking about like matching industry to what's taught, whether that's in K through 12 or in academia. I feel like there's often a disconnect in the technologies, and the technologies move fast, right? So it's kind of hard to keep up, but it's like, how are we preparing students? In my computer science PhD program, we weren't learning anything that I could go back to Apple with or back to Twitter or, like it's archaic almost. And it's like, when are we going to shake things up so that we can prepare students to go into these roles if that's what they want to do in a useful way? So
yeah, especially like if you think of like kindergartners, by the time they finish high school, that's like 13 years later. So the odds are things are going to change.
Yeah, and it's like curriculum doesn't a lot of times. I once had an idea that I never really went forward with. A lot of folks that are in industry want to give back in some way. Like they want to be useful. They want to use their knowledge either with students or with teachers. And it's like, well, how can we connect the two? It's like, okay, this could look like a Slack group where we have educators and software engineers. The educators are teaching software engineering, but they have a question that's specific to a certain technology or whatever. And they could like just ping some of the engineers like, hey, can you help me out with this? Maybe the engineers don't know how to teach it, but they can kind of like break it down to help with the teacher. I don't know. I just feel like there's this disconnect with the working world, with like the tech workforce and education as a whole. And that frustrates me because I don't know what the solution is.
Yeah, almost like a Stack Overflow for educators to communicate with people that might be more content knowledge heavy or whatever.
Yeah, I'm just like, where could that go? Like, I don't know. I'm not saying that I know all the things and I've seen all the things, but that is something that has felt like a disconnect, even just through my work with Intech. Even when we hire, right? Like we always try to strike that balance, like, or at least pair someone who works in the industry with an educator that may not be super knowledgeable, but it's like they know how to manage a classroom. So we're going to make sure they're the lead, but you're there to help them with the technical stuff. And it's always interesting how that works out.
Yeah, in our PD, it's been hard sometimes to get some teachers to let go of that. Like, I need to know everything in advance. Like, no, you just need to learn how to learn. Like, that's the more important thing, because kids are constantly asked questions where it's like, I don't know that yet. Let me come back to you tomorrow, or let's work through it together, etc. And it's hard when like you're speaking to somebody who might have degrees in a subject that they're teaching and they feel very knowledgeable of, and then you're asking them to add in a whole nother language and platform and ways of understanding and creating that they're like, but wait, I don't have a background in this.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I realized that like as a PhD student, you have about 10 different ideas and you just have to pick the one that get you out. And so I'm actually happy that we're having this conversation because it's giving me something to think about as I go onto the job market.
Where might people go to connect with you and the organizations that you work with?
Yeah, so you can find me pretty much anywhere as Kalia Braswell, KHALIA BRASWELL, KaliaBraswell.com, Kalia Braswell on Instagram, Kalia Braswell on Twitter. I made it all the same a long time ago. I do not check LinkedIn and Facebook as much, so those are not the best places. And then Intech Camp, INTECHCAMP.org is our website. Also Intech Camp on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So definitely look forward to engaging with folks. Right now, we're still virtual, so we welcome students from anywhere. We had a student in Canada last summer, which was nice to tap into our program.
And with that, that concludes this week's episode of the CSK8 podcast. Make sure you visit jaredoleary.com to check out the show notes, to get all the links to Kalia and Intech's social media handles and websites. And if you enjoyed this particular episode, make sure you check out all the others. There are over 100 episodes right now that discuss a variety of publications and have some really awesome interviews with some pretty cool people. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this. Stay tuned next week for another episode, and until then, I hope you're all staying safe and are having a wonderful week.